The transport engines groaned like wounded animals as Kael Drayven climbed aboard the lead vehicle of the convoy. Dawn had not yet broken over the shattered skyline of Zephyrus Station, the last functioning outpost of the Free Guardians on Zephyrus. But there was no time for sunrise. There was no time for anything anymore. General Karim stood at the vehicle's open door, his broad silhouette framed by the dying orange glow of a city that had been burning for 11 days. He was a man built from decades of war, deep-set eyes that had seen more devastation than any single mind should have to absorb, a jaw that stayed set and resolute even when the rest of the world crumbled. He pressed one hand against the doorframe and studied Kael with that measuring look he always used, the look that said, "I am deciding whether you are ready." 312, Karim said. Kael looked at him. "Sir, that's how many we have left in this convoy. 312 men, women, and fighters willing to drive into the mouth of the enemy to keep you alive long enough to reach that vault." He paused. "I want you to remember that number. Every single one of them gave up their last chance to evacuate to the outer system. Remember that." Kael looked back across the convoy, a ragged serpent of armored transports, flatbed carriers loaded with missile batteries, and civilian ground crawlers retrofitted with salvage weapons. The fighters loading their gear did not look like soldiers. They looked like survivors, dock workers with rifles, teachers who had learned to field-strip plasma cannons, elderly men who had refused to flee, because this was their planet, their civilization, their ground to defend. "I'll remember," Kael said quietly. Karim studied him for a moment longer, then gave a short nod. "Then let's move." The convoy rolled out of Zephyrus Station just as the first vortex orbital strike lit the horizon to the east, a pillar of violet-white fire reaching from sky to ground, collapsing what remained of the Zillion Heritage Quarter in a thunderclap that rolled across the plains like the voice of something vast and merciless. Zephyrus was dying. They drove through its funeral. The first 50 kilometers took them through what had once been the Karavan agricultural belt, 10,000 square kilometers of the most fertile land on the planet. Kael remembered images of it from Zillion history archives. Golden fields of memory grain stretching to horizon, water channels glittering under twin moons, villages where families had farmed the same land for 40 generations. Now it was ash. The vortex had carpet-bombed Karavan 3 weeks ago. Nothing had been spared. Not the farmhouses, not the irrigation systems, not the ancient stone granaries that predated the Republic by 1,000 years. The convoy moved through a colorless wasteland where the wind raised spirals of pale dust from the ruined earth. Occasionally, the wreckage of a farmhouse emerged from the gray murk. Its walls collapsed, its interior opened to the sky like a cracked eggshell. Sora was beside Kael in the lead transport, studying the tactical display projected from her wrist unit. She was his best intelligence officer and one of the few people left alive who knew the terrain of the enemy's occupation better than the enemy itself. She had barely slept in 4 days. Her eyes were red at the edges, but her focus was absolute. "Vortex drone patrol, 11 o'clock, she said without looking up. "They're running sensor sweeps every 4 minutes. We need to stay below the ridgeline, or they'll pick us up." Kael relayed the order. The convoy shifted course, following a dry riverbed that cut north beneath the natural shelter of a long basalt escarpment. The ridge blocked the drone's line of sight, but also meant driving blind. No visibility beyond 20 meters in the ash-laden air. Then they heard the sound. It was faint at first, a low, rhythmic scraping, like hundreds of feet dragging through gravel. Kael ordered the convoy to halt and climbed to the top of the lead vehicle with a scope. He swept it across the ridgeline to the south. The refugee column stretched as far as the scope could reach. Thousands of people, tens of thousands, moving west along the base of a distant ridge, carrying whatever they could lift, old men with bundles of salvage clothing on their backs, women carrying children too exhausted to walk, a boy pulling a cart stacked with data cores, the digital records of some institution someone had decided were worth saving, all of them coated in the same gray ash, moving in the same direction, driven by the same animal logic of survival. Kael felt something cold move through him. "How many?" he asked. Sora consulted her scanner. 30,000 at minimum, possibly 50. These are people from the eastern districts, Karavan, Mervith, the coastal settlements. The vortex swept through all of them in the same offensive. Where are they going? Nowhere good. The western evacuation ports were destroyed 6 days ago. She hesitated. Most of them don't know that yet. Kael stared at the column. 50,000 people walking toward a destination that no longer existed, carrying everything they owned through a wasteland, and none of them knew. He thought about ordering the convoy to stop, to warn them, to try to help redirect them. But to what? There was no safe direction on Zephyrus anymore. Every path led through the enemy. Every shelter had been burned or occupied. He closed his eyes for a moment. Remember why you're doing this, he told himself. The only way you help any of them is by reaching the vault. He ordered the convoy forward. They drove past a refugee column at distance. Hidden by the ash haze, seen by no one, Kael watched through the port window until the column disappeared into the gray. They stopped to refuel at a collapsed substation on the southern edge of the Karim belt. The technicians worked quickly, transferring energy cells between vehicles. When a girl appeared from beneath the ruins of a storage shed, she was perhaps 11 years old. Her face was smeared with ash and dried blood from a cut above her ear. She carried nothing. She stood at the edge of the convoy's perimeter and stared at Kael with dark, absolutely serious eyes. "Are you free Guardians?" she asked. "We are," Kael said. "My name is Mira. My parents are dead. The vortex killed them when they burned Karim Station. I've been hiding here for 6 days." She said it without drama, simply as information. "I know the secondary roads through the Mervith foothills. I've walked all of them. I can show you a route that avoids 3 of the vortex checkpoints." Kael looked at her. She held his gaze without wavering. "You're 11 years old," he said. "I know," said Mira. "I'm also the only person who's walked the Mervith roads in the last week and survived." She paused. "Do you want a route or not?" He took her in. She rode in the second transport, eating the first real meal she'd had in days. And for the next 3 hours, she guided the convoy through a network of collapsed service tunnels and overgrown maintenance paths that wound through foothills with such precision that they bypassed 2 vortex patrol routes entirely. She never cried. She never hesitated. She simply watched the landscape with those serious eyes and said, "Turn here. Not that bridge. It's mine. This culvert holds. I tested it." When they cleared the foothills and the road opened up again, Kael sat beside her. "You're going to be all right," he said. He wasn't entirely sure it was true. Mira looked at him. "Is there a vault?" she asked. "I heard the soldiers talking. Is there really something that can stop all this?" Kael held her gaze. "We're going to find out." She nodded. That seemed to be enough. The Merath River crossing was the first major engagement. The vortex had established a fortified checkpoint at the only intact bridge, a wide, heavily armored structure of pre-war Zillion engineering that spanned a gorge 200 meters deep. Taking it was not optional. The alternative crossing points had all been demolished. Intelligence said the checkpoint had been lightly garrisoned, but intelligence on Zephyrus was proving reliably wrong. As the convoy approached the ruins of Merath town, they came under heavy fire from 3 directions simultaneously. Ambush! Ambush left. Infantry positions in the ruins. The lead transport lurched as an energy bolt sheared off its forward armor panel. Kael dropped behind the vehicle and drew his sidearm, scanning the crumbled building facades for muzzle flash. The fighters around him scattered into practice positions, some into cover, some advancing low along the roadside, returning fire with controlled fury of people who had nothing left to lose. The battle lasted 40 minutes. It felt like 40 years. Kael fought alongside the convoy's ground element, moving from building to building through streets that were a maze of collapsed masonry and burnt vehicles. He learned the names of the people around him in combat. The way you always learn names in combat, in fragments between moments of terror. Dex, who had been a structural engineer before the war, and now moved through rubble with fluid expertise. Thana, who took a grazing hit to her shoulder in the first minute and kept fighting for the next 39 without mentioning it. Old Sergeant Voss, who coordinated the flanking movement that finally broke the vortex checkpoint position with the calm of someone arranging furniture. When the checkpoint fell and the convoy crossed a bridge, they had lost 7 people. 7 in 40 minutes. Kael stood at the far side of the crossing and looked back across the bridge. The bodies of the fallen had been loaded aboard a transport. They would not be left behind. Not yet. Not while there was space. But 7 people who had been alive this morning. 7 people who had chosen to drive into enemy territory for a vault they'd never seen, for an artifact they could only believe in. General Karim appeared beside him. The general had fought on the front of the push, moving with a veteran's economy of motion, never reckless but never far from the fighting. His arm had been grazed. He'd wrapped it himself and said nothing about it. "You're second-guessing yourself," Karim said. It wasn't a question. 7 people. 7 people who made their choice. Honor the choice, not the loss. Karim watched the convoy moving across the bridge. The moment you start weighting lives against a mission, you lose the ability to lead. The mission saves billions. The 7 knew that. Kael watched the last transport cross. That doesn't make it easier. No, Karim agreed. It doesn't. Nothing makes it easier. You carry the weight and you keep moving. That's what leadership is. Son, that's all it is. The ruins of Havas City rose from the plain like a broken jawbone. Towers sheared at their midsections, bridges dangling in the air disconnected from their destinations, entire districts compressed into rubble fields by what must have been sustained orbital bombardment. And yet, as the convoy picked its way through the outer ruins, they realized the city was not entirely empty. People were still there, 15,000 of them, according to Sora's scan, living in basements, in hardened shelters, in the rubble warrens of collapsed blocks that were too dense for vortex sensors to penetrate effectively. They had organized themselves with extraordinary ingenuity. Water was collected from broken pipes deep in the earth, purified through improvised filters. Food was grown in sealed basement hydroponic systems fashioned from salvaged materials. A communications network ran to the city's old data conduit system, giving the underground population information and warning time before vortex sweeps. The leader of Havata's underground resistance was a woman named Director Asta, formerly the city's chief administrator, now the defiant heart of the city that refused to die. She met the convoy in the ruins of the municipal transport hub, flanked by armed citizens who had been holding their positions for 19 days. "We can give you fuel, medical supplies, and a route through the city that avoids the 3 vortex garrison points," she said briskly, offering her hand to Kael. "In exchange, I want you to take a data core. Everything we know about vortex troop movements, patrol patterns, and weak points in their occupation network, from 19 days of living inside it." Kael took the data core. "You're giving us your intelligence advantage. You're going to the vault. If you succeed, you won't need it anymore. If you fail," she shrugged with pragmatism that was somehow both devastating and inspiring. "If you fail, it won't matter." The convoy spent 6 hours in Haveth. The city's people came out to help. Quietly, efficiently, moving supplies to the vehicles with practiced silence, while vortex drones swept the sky overhead and found nothing unusual in the ruins. Kael watched a man who couldn't have been younger than 70 carrying a fuel cell twice his weight without complaint. He watched children distributing ration packs to the convoy fighters, examining the soldiers' weapons with curious, unafraid eyes. One of those children, a boy of perhaps 8 with enormous dark eyes and a serious expression that mirrored Mira's, tugged on Kael's sleeve as he was preparing to depart. "My dad says you can fix everything," the boy said. Kael crouched to eye level. "I'm going to try." The boy considered this. He also said trying is what matters. Kael held that thought for a long time after the convoy left Havre behind, as the city's broken skyline shrank in the rear view. 15,000 people still alive inside it, still refusing to give up. The strike came at midday on the 3rd day, without warning. 2 vortex interceptors dropped from the cloud cover at supersonic velocity, making no sound until they were already overhead, and then the sound arrived as a wall of compressed air that physically rocked the convoy vehicles on their wheels. The first bombs were not explosives, but electromagnetic bursts that killed every unshielded electronic system in a 200-meter radius. 7 transports went dead, their engines cutting out, their crews left exposed. "Scatter. Get the vehicles off the road." The next wave was kinetic. Vortex interceptors were not subtle weapons. They made craters. The road erupted in 3 places simultaneously. 2 vehicles, a cargo carrier and a fighter transport, were simply gone, replaced by smoking holes in the earth. The The blast waves rolled across the convoy like physical blows. Kael was thrown from his position atop the lead vehicle, hit the ground hard, and came up running through smoke and fire and the terrible sound of people in crisis. Cover. Get into the ravine. Move the wounded. Move. The next 20 minutes were controlled chaos at the edge of disaster. The surviving vehicles pushed off-road into the shelter of a rocky ravine, their anti-air teams deploying surface-to-air batteries with furious speed. 3 of the AA units were destroyed before they could fire. The 4th found its mark. The 2nd interceptor came down 2 kilometers west, a spiral of black smoke and burning fuel that marked the sky for hours. The first one banged for another pass, but the 3rd AA battery, jury-rigged to a flatbed carrier, its targeting system operated by a young technician named Pell who had never fired it in combat, caught on a turn and sent it spinning into planes beyond the ravine's edge. When the sky was silent again, they counted the cost. 19 dead, 31 wounded, 11 of them critically. Kael walked the length of the convoy through the aftermath. He stopped at each cluster of the fallen, and he looked at them. He did not look away. He burned their faces into his memory, every single one. A young man with a medic's pack still strapped to his chest, killed before he could use it. A veteran fighter, older than Karim, who had come out of retirement to join the convoy because she had told Kael the night before she didn't know how to not fight when her planet needed her. We're exposed here, Sora said quietly beside him. We need to move within the hour. I know. Kael, her voice was careful. We've lost 37 people total since departure. If we take 3 or 4 more strikes like this, we won't reach the gorge with enough people to matter. Yes. Kael was quiet for a moment. Then we don't take 3 or 4 more strikes. He turned to Sora. Get me Asta's intelligence data from Havith. Every patrol pattern, every vortex garrison position between here and the gorge. We're going to find a path they're not watching. Sora looked at him, surprised, perhaps at the certainty in his voice. Then she nodded. I'll have it in 20 minutes. They drove through the next night without lights, guided by terrain mapping overlaid directly onto the driver's vision systems. Sora had found a path, narrow, improbable, threading between 3 vortex garrison zones through a series of geological features that made sensor penetration difficult. Ancient lava tubes, dense metallic or deposits, the broken terrain of what had once been a tectonic fault line now pressed flat by some long-ago catastrophe. It was the most dangerous driving any of them had ever done. The path was barely wide enough for single vehicles in places. 3 times they had to manually disassemble the vehicles with extensions to squeeze through rock formations that seemed designed to refuse them passage. A transport lost a wheel hub in a subsidence pit and had to be abandoned, its crew redistributed among the remaining vehicles with quiet efficiency. But the vortex didn't find them. Not that night. Kael used the hours of night driving to move through the convoy on foot, walking the length of it during the slowest passages, speaking to the fighters and civilians, learning who they were. He had done this instinctively at first, driven by the awareness that General Karim was right. He needed to know these people. But somewhere in the 3rd hour of the night drive, he realized it had stopped being instinct and started being something else. Genuine need. He wanted to know them. He wanted to understand why each of them was here, what they were fighting for, what they were afraid of. He found a malicious soldier named Ren sitting on top of a transport, watching the sky. Can't sleep? Kael asked, climbing up beside him. Never sleep on operations, Ren said. He was mid-30s, compact, with the kind of stillness that came from long practice. I was a freight pilot before the war. Ran cargo between Zephyrus and the outer stations. Good life. Ren smiled briefly. Simple life. I had a daughter who was going to start at the academy next year. He paused. She didn't make it past the first week of the invasion. Kael was quiet. I'm not telling you that for sympathy, Ren said quickly. I'm telling you because I want you to know why I'm here. It's not duty. It's not ideology. It's just that, after she was gone, the only thing that made any sense was to find a way to make sure it didn't happen to anyone else's daughter. He looked at the sky. I don't know what's in that vault. I don't know if it actually does anything. But everyone who does know says it's the only shot we've got. So here I am. Here you are. Kael agreed. Can I ask you something? Wren said, "Yes. Do you actually think we can win this?" Kael looked at the dark landscape scrolling past, the ruins of civilization in every direction, the fires on the horizon that never seemed to go out. He thought about the 7 at the bridge, the 19 in the airstrike, the 50,000 refugees walking toward nothing. He thought about Mira's serious eyes and the boy in Haveth, and Director Asta's absolute defiance. "I think," he said carefully, "that if we don't try, the answer is definitely no. And if we do try, even with everything against us, there's at least a chance. So we try." Wren nodded slowly. "That's enough," he said. "For me, that's enough." On the morning of the 4th day, Sora delivered the news that Kael had been dreading. "We have fuel for 2/3 of the remaining vehicles," she said. "Medical supplies are at 15%. Food is adequate for 4 more days at current rations, but I've been cutting rations, so it's actually 3. She paused. "And the water filtration unit on Transport 7 failed last night. We have 36 hours of clean water reserve. Options?" Kael asked. 1. She pulled up a map. "There's a pre-war resource depot here, a Zillion civil defense installation, buried 2 kilometers underground, designed to survive orbital bombardment. According to Havitha's data, the vortex hasn't found it yet. It's 40 kilometers off our current route." 40 kilometers. That was hours in their current conditions. Hours they might not have. The alternative is continuing with what we have, and hoping we reach the gorge before we run dry. Kael spread the map with both hands and stared at it. The gorge was still 3 days away at their current pace. They would not make it without the depot. "We go for the depot," he said. The 40-kilometer detour brought them to the outskirts of a town that had been, according to Sora's records, a center of Zillion cultural life. Home to the oldest standing library in the Republic, a building that had survived 2 previous wars through sheer structural brilliance, 8 stories of reinforced pre-atomic architecture that had been tested by centuries and found unbreakable. The vortex had broken it. The library was a ruin. They drove past its collapsed facade slowly, the convoy moving at a walking pace through streets still littered with burnt pages. Tens of millions of pages, the physical record of Zillion civilization's literary tradition, scattered and charred across kilometers of pavement by whatever fire had consumed the building. Kael watched the pages move in the wind of the convoy's passing. Fragments of novels, histories, poems, scientific papers, correspondence, art books. The knowledge of a species distributed across a ruined street by conquest. No one spoke in the convoy for a long time. The depot was intact. 6 hours to excavate the access shaft. 2 hours to load what they needed. When they drove back on the main route, fully fueled and resupplied, Kael allowed himself to think for the first time that they might actually make it. They saw the Obsidian Gorge on the evening of the 6th day. It was not what Kael had imagined. He had imagined a geological feature, a crack in the planet's surface, impressive but ultimately just terrain. What he saw was something that seemed to rewrite his understanding of the word gorge. The Obsidian Gorge was a wound in the face of Zephyrus 40 kilometers wide and of unmeasured depth. Its walls were genuine obsidian, volcanic glass of absolute blackness that caught the light of the dying sun and threw it back in fractured rainbows that had no business being beautiful in the context of what surrounded them. The walls were vertical, sheer, perfectly smooth in places and jagged as shattered blade in others. The gorge cut through the landscape like a stroke of absolute geological authority, separating the eastern territories from the western reaches with a barrier that had frustrated surface travel for as long as Zillion civilization had records. At its floor, visible only through Sora's enhanced optics, was a structure that predated the Republic, predated the first Zillion city-states, predated recorded history entirely. The vault, and around the vault, spread across the gorge's floor and surrounding plateau, in the greatest military concentration Kael had seen since the orbital images of the initial invasion, was the Vortex Army. He pressed the scope to his eyes, and his blood went cold. "Sora, what am I looking at?" Her voice was careful and precise, the way it always got when the news was very bad. "Armored walkers. I count 19, each one approximately 200 feet tall. Anti-air defense systems, multiple emplacements, minimum 40. Energy shield generators in a perimeter configuration, 3 layers. She paused. Fortified infantry positions, entrenched. Troop estimate. Tell me. Conservative estimate, 30,000. Possibly double that in the outer perimeter positions. The convoy sat on a ridge 3 kilometers from the gorge's edge and looked at an army that should have made them turn around. 30,000 soldiers. Armored walkers 200 feet tall. 3 layers of energy shielding. And somewhere down there, Sora's intelligence confirmed, was Vex himself, the supreme commander of the Vortex forces, who had arrived ahead of them through channels they still didn't fully understand. General Karim stood beside Kael on the ridge, studying the same view with the same scope. "I've fought bigger," Karim said finally. Kael looked at him. "I'm lying," Karim admitted. "I've never fought anything close to this." He lowered the scope. "But I've fought things I thought were impossible and found a gap in them. There's always a gap." He studied the disposition of forces with the patience of a man who had spent 30 years finding gaps. Their left flank is anchored on the gorge edge, no lateral maneuver space. Their right flank is stronger but tied to the walker line, which means they can't redeploy the walkers without exposing the shield generators. He paused. A concentrated assault on the left, with a secondary push through the center to split their attention, might open a corridor narrow enough for a small team to penetrate. Might, Kael said, leadership's son, is making decisions on might. They worked through the night. What emerged from 14 hours of planning, argument, revision, and brutal honesty was not a plan for victory. It was a plan for survival long enough. Not long enough to destroy the Vortex army. Long enough for Kael, Sora, and 4 others to reach the vault entrance, while the rest of the Free Guardians bought them time. The plan required a convoy's main force to engage the Vortex left flank with everything they had. Every vehicle, every weapon, every fighter, creating a breach in the defensive line through sheer desperate pressure. Meanwhile, a secondary element under Karim's personal command would strike the center, targeting the shield generators, drawing attention and firepower, and keeping the walkers occupied. Through the chaos and smoke and the desperate fighting, Kael's team would move. The people who participated in the flanking attack were, in many cases, committing to something close to a suicide mission. Every one of them knew it. Every one of them volunteered. Kael spoke to the convoy before dawn. 300 fighters, wounded and whole, civilians who had become soldiers who had become legends in 6 days of survival, gathered in the darkness at the gorge's edge. He did not give them a speech about glory or destiny. He told them the truth, that what they were about to do was extraordinarily dangerous, that the odds were not good, that he would not insult them by pretending otherwise, and that the reason they were doing it anyway was because every single zillion alive deserved the chance to survive, and this was the only path that gave them that chance. "I know what I'm asking," he said. "I know what it costs, and I am asking anyway, because I have to, and because you are the only people in the galaxy I would trust to answer." No one spoke. No one had to. They were already moving to their positions. The battle began before dawn, in the last absolute darkness before the sun rose, with missile fire that lit the plateau like false daylight. The Free Guardians hit the Vortex left flank with everything simultaneously. Every missile platform, every direct-fire weapon, every vehicle-mounted gun, in a concentrated burst of violence that was designed to be overwhelming for long enough to matter. The Vortex offensive line erupted in counterfire almost instantly. They were alert, prepared, professional soldiers serving in one of the most powerful military forces in the known galaxy. But they were not prepared for ferocity that 300 people with nothing left to lose could generate. The walkers came first, giants striding to the pre-dawn murk, their articulated feet shaking the plateau with each step, their weapon systems capable of destroying vehicles at 10 kilometers. The convoy's anti-armor teams focused everything on their joints, their power couplings, their sensor clusters, not trying to destroy them, just try to slow them, to complicate their movement, to keep their attention. Walker 4 took a coordinated hit from 6 missile teams simultaneously and came down on its left side with a crash that shook the ground for a kilometer in every direction, its wreckage creating an unexpected terrain feature that partially blocked Walker 7's advance. Kael moved. His team of 6 crossed the plateau through smoke and fire, moving low, using the chaos of the battle's left flank as cover. Sora guided them through her tactical display, identifying gaps in the Vortex infantry positions, routes through the confusion, moments when enemy attention was elsewhere. They were almost invisible, 6 people running in the shadow of a war, beneath the notice of the titanic forces engaged around them. The fighting was apocalyptic. Explosions tore through the gorge in chains, each one triggering cascades of secondary detonations among fuel stores and ammunition caches. Laser fire, the concentrated energy beams of vortex-heavy weapons, carved rivers of superheated air across the plateau, turning stone to glass wherever they struck. The sound was beyond sound, a continuous physical force that hit the body like blows. General Karim was everywhere. Kael caught glimpses of him through the smoke, organizing rallies when the line buckled, personally leading the rush that took out the first shield generator, coordinating the center push with clarity and presence that seemed to physically sustain the people around him. Where Karim was, the line held. Where Karim moved, the line advanced. The second shield generator fell. A corridor opened. "Kael, there's your path." Sora's voice in his earpiece, urgent and precise. 200 meters to the gorge descent point. "Go now." He went. The descent into the gorge was a 60-meter rappel down obsidian walls, so smooth and perfect they seemed manufactured rather than geological. His team moved fast, dropping in pairs, covering each other as they descended. Below, the vault's exterior became visible, an ancient structure of a material that was not stone and not metal, built to a scale with a solidity that made modern architecture look provisional. And then everything stopped. The cessation of fire was instantaneous, not a gradual tapering. One moment the battle was continuous roar of organized chaos, and then it was nothing. Silence dropped onto the gorge like a physical weight. Kael's team froze at the base of the gorge wall, weapons raised, scanning for contact. The vortex forces on the plateau had withdrawn to their defensive positions with a speed and precision that was impossible to explain tactically. They should have been in the middle of breaking through the Free Guardian line. They had numbers, advantage, momentum. Nothing about pulling back made sense. "What just happened?" One of his team members breathed. Kael didn't answer. He was already scanning the gorge floor, reading the silence, trying to understand what it meant. Then the transmission came through on the open channel. Every frequency simultaneously, as if whoever sent it wanted to make absolutely certain it was received. Kael Drayven. The voice was not what he expected. It was measured, almost quiet, a voice that seemed to carry the weight of something it had been carrying for a very long time. "I am requesting a parley. One-on-one. Vault entrance. No weapons, no forces. Come alone." The transmission identified its source. Supreme Commander Vex. Kael's team looked at him. The faces around him showed the same calculation he was running. This was obviously a trap, obviously a manipulation, obviously the kind of invitation that ended in exactly the way you were afraid it would. But the vortex forces were genuinely standing down, and the alternative to taking the parley was fighting their way to the vault through 30,000 soldiers, which was not survivable. "Hold position," he told his team. "Cover me from the gorge wall." He secured his weapon across his back. "I'll be careful." "Kael," Sora started. "I know," he said, and walked toward the vault. Vex was taller than Kael expected and older. He stood before the vault entrance with his hands visible and his posture carrying a weariness that seemed structural. Not the fatigue of a battle, but the exhaustion of a life. His uniform was a deep violet black of Vortex High Command, precisely maintained, but his eyes told a different story. They were the eyes of someone who had been looking for a way out for years and had finally decided to try the door. "You came alone," Vex said. He sounded almost surprised. "You asked me to," Kael said. He stopped 10 meters away. "What do you want?" Vex studied him for a moment. Then he said, simply, "I want you to open the vault." Kael was quiet. "I know how that sounds," Vex continued. "I know what you think I am. I know what I have done in the service of commands I did not choose and could not refuse." Something moved across his face that was either grief or its mirror image. "I have spent my entire life as an instrument. The Vortex do not choose their commanders. We are selected, conditioned, shaped from birth according to the architect's specifications. Every decision I have made, every order I have given, every strategy one have executed, I was not the author of any of it. The architect works through us. The architect has always worked through us." Kael listened without interrupting. 6 months ago, I found something in the deepest archives of the Vortex Command Network. A record that predates my civilization's recorded history. A record of what the vortex were before the architect. We were not conquerors. Vex's voice was steady, but its steadiness cost him something visible. We were explorers, scholars. We built things. We discovered things. And then the architect came, and we became what we are. He paused. There is a record of the first world the architect destroyed. Do you know which one it was? Kael said nothing. Zephyrus, Vex said. This planet. The ancient Zillion civilization that lived here before your republic. The architect destroyed them 10,000 years ago. Not completely. It couldn't finish the task because something was stopping it. He looked at the vault behind. Something was imprisoned here. An intelligence, an entity. Something the ancient Zillions trapped inside this vault before their civilization fell, specifically to prevent the architect from accessing it. Because what's inside this vault is the only thing that can stop the architect. It is, in fact, the only thing that ever could. Kael stared at him. The architect has been trying to access this vault for 10,000 years, Vex said. That is the actual reason we are here. That is the actual reason for this invasion. Not to destroy Zephyrus, not to occupy it, but to reach this vault and destroy what's inside before anyone else can use it against the architect. He held Kael's gaze. But I found the record, and I came here not to destroy it. I came here to let you open it, to let whatever is inside out. The silence in the gorge was absolute. The entity inside is not a weapon, Vex continued. It is a consciousness, ancient, vast, deeply opposed to everything the architect represents. The ancient Zillions didn't imprison it to contain a threat. They imprisoned it to protect it, to keep the architect from destroying it. If you release it, it can oppose the architect in ways that nothing else in existence can. He took a breath. I want you to open the vault. In exchange, I will stand my forces down completely. I will order every Vortex soldier on this planet to cease fire. I ask one thing. Promise me that whatever's inside, you will release it, no matter what. The wind moved through the gorge. Above, on the plateau, the silence held. Why should I trust you? Kael asked. You shouldn't, Vex said immediately. I have given you no reason to. I am the enemy who has been destroying your world for months. But I am also the only person standing between you and 30,000 soldiers, and I have the authority to hold them here as long as I choose. He paused. I am not asking you to trust me. I am asking you to consider the possibility that I am telling the truth. Kael stood in the shadow of the vault and thought about Mira and Ren and the boy in Haveth, and the 50,000 refugees walking toward nothing, and the 37 people who had died to get him here, and the hundreds still fighting on the plateau above. He thought about what it meant to release something imprisoned for 10,000 years when you didn't fully understand what it was. He opened his mouth to respond, and then his earpiece crackled. Sora's voice, and in her voice was something he had never heard before. Kael. She stopped, started again. Kael, I have to tell you something. General Karim is... He knew from the pause what came next. He's dead. Her voice was carefully controlled, and the control was costing her everything. An assassin during the battle, embedded in the Vortex ground forces. We think a sleeper unit specifically positioned for this. He was defending the breach point. She stopped again. He left a message. He must have recorded it before the assault. He said it was for this moment. He said you'd know when. Kael closed his eyes. He could feel the shape of what was coming. He could feel it the way you feel the ground dropping away beneath you before you see the edge. Play it, he said. Karim's voice came through the earpiece, recorded hours ago, in the calm before the storm, with the careful deliberateness of a man who knew he might not survive to say it in person. Kael, if you're hearing this, you're at the vault and I'm not with you. So I'll say what I need to say now while I still can. Listen carefully. Whatever Vex tells you, whatever he offers, whatever story he presents, do not trust it. Do not open the vault. The entity inside is not a prison of the architect. It is not a weapon against the architect. It is the architect. The vault was built to contain it 10,000 years ago precisely because it was too dangerous to destroy. The ancient Zillions understood that destroying it would be worse than containing it. Releasing it would be releasing something that destroyed civilizations before anyone alive had a word for civilization. the Vortex, the Architect, Vex. They have all been trying to reach this vault for 10,000 years. Vex's story is the Architect's final manipulation. It is designed specifically for this moment, to make you believe that releasing what's inside will save your people. It will not. It will end everything. Do not open the vault, son. I'm sorry I can't be there to stand beside you. I know you'll do the right thing. Kael stood in the absolute silence of the Obsidian Gorge, at the entrance to a vault that had waited 10,000 years. Before him stood Vex, watching him with eyes that held the way a life lived as an instrument, asking him to make a choice that would determine the fate of every living thing he had ever known. In his earpiece, General Karim's final words faded into static. Above, on the plateau, hundreds of his people held their ground, awaiting his signal. And somewhere behind the ancient doors of the vault, whatever had been waiting for 10,000 years, waited still. Kael Drayven breathed. He thought, one of them is telling the truth. He thought, and everything depends on which one. He looked at Vex. He looked at the vault. He looked up at the obsidian walls rising around him, catching the day's light and throwing back 1,000 fractured colors, beautiful and cold and indifferent to the choice before him. And then he made his decision.